Hey, brother, good to have you back so soon after doing the first part that is yet to be released. And we put it out there that if you wanted to ask questions based on the show we just did, that we'd maybe answer it in potentially a second part. We were kind of going with the flow. We didn't know how soon we'd be doing it. So it's not out there yet. So once you've watched the first part and you've watched this part, then any questions, maybe we'll do a separate whole episode just discussing the questions that come in from people. If there are any questions that come in from people, and we can bounce it out between each other. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be great. And hopefully there will be. Hopefully we kind of did enough to encourage some questions and get people, thinking and asking. So sounds good.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because someone on our team said he was watching it over as they were editing, and said it was like watching a thriller. So, hey, it's pretty thrilling, apparently. So, we'll jump into this one. And I guess this kind of recap what we went through from the last podcast. And, I feel like the end of it was going somewhere. And we had to kind of cut it off just at the right time, instinctively.
Yeah. And
you had something to go to that you didn't even inform me about. I just was, let's just finish now. But this time I know you have something to go to. And it was ending up on the boulder, pushing the recap. What was the...
Yeah.
You remember all this information far better than I do.
Yeah, I think I was saved by the bell in many ways, because I think you were about to point out a series of kind of contradictions in my narrative. But yeah, I guess the theme last time was meaning making, wasn't it? How we make meaning. And I was coming from the position that perhaps we need to acknowledge just that as humans, that we make meaning, that there is no external, objective, cosmic level of meaning. And that can sound quite miserable, but we were getting to the crux of that and what that meant. For me, that's a very liberating idea, because once we accept that there is no predetermined type of external meaning that we must achieve, then we're the creators of our own existence, we're the creators of our own kind of freedom. And I guess we were kind of grappling with that, and, is there kind of this cosmic, universal type of meaning that, we can arrive at and feel some sort of self-actualization and all those kinds of ideas. And to articulate that, I was invoking Camus' myth of Sisyphus. And Albert Camus writes this book utilizing the Greek myth of Sisyphus, who is punished to an eternity of pushing a boulder up a hill. And when the boulder gets to the top of the hill, it falls back down again and he has to do it again. And that's his punishment for eternity. And Camus sort of indicates that this could be all of us. We're just pushing the rock up the hill, we graduate high school, we go to college, we go to university, we get the job, the short-term contract, we get a longer-term contract, we get stability at work, we get a mortgage, we go through the motions. And I guess the human life course in that way is kind of rhythmic and thematic. Everybody goes through something, similar. And Camus would call this, something like pushing that rock.
Yeah.
That's not to say that all our lives are kind of utterly miserable and about punishment, but once we acknowledge that maybe none of it really means anything externally, we can, stop on the hill and have a look at the precipice and take in the views. We can talk to wise old men on the way up the hill, as the character in Camus' book does. And we can kind of enjoy what it is to be liberated in that kind of meaningless existence. But I'm aware that meaninglessness sounds awful.
Well, that's okay. There's no judgment here, and whatever's coming up, it needs to come up, because so many people may actually feel that way, and maybe they do actually believe in that is their life, and they're pushing that boulder up. And coming from the New Earth, being that this is New Earth Studios, I'm going to challenge anything and everything. And I don't have the background and formalized education that you do. You can hear it in your voice and how articulate you are, and the fact you grapple, that you have this way of words and understanding, and the memory is really incredible, I have to say.
Thank you.
So, and I guess my mind just doesn't seem to hold information in that same way. I mean, I skipped through school pretty much, and I just had a different way of learning. And I guess I just go with the free flow of what is coming at that moment, which gives me, I feel, some original creative ideas. I hope that we can show here. So I was looking at the boulder, and when we were talking afterwards, right? For a lot of people, if you're pushing that boulder, you're pushing it because you have to for someone. you could look at it based on that philosophy. And when we had a conversation, you know, afterwards, it was, you know, what is a representation for you? And it may be that you're pushing it up because you're still within a system that your time is for money. And when you're in a position where you're exchanging your time for money, then it does feel like you're pushing a boulder up because you don't have that free time anytime you want. And so most people out there are in a position where they feel like they have to exchange their time for money in some regard. And I understand that. I've been there myself. And to come to a place not being there, it is a whole new freedom that you've never experienced before until you experience it, right? And then you know there is no boulder to push anymore. Then it's about, okay, what am I really truly inspired and motivated by? Because I don't have to get out of bed to do anything,
Right.
I could say. But when you're truly in touch with yourself and you feel like you are wanting to live a meaningful life, then there is some drive that is innately within you that, for me, doing this podcast and bringing you on and creating the New Earth Cafe and the self-love brand, what is it really for, you know? Well, it's something that came to me. It was something that came to us, me and my wife, and it was this calling and this deeper need to carry on growing and then innovating and then expanding and finding vessels of how we can manifest that in this reality. And for us, that meant the whole paradigm changed. There was no hill, there was no boulder, that was all gone. And the New Earth is that ray of light for people who may be in a particular place that they don't know, like the abyss you mentioned before, that there is another whole paradigm shift. And I've been on the other side, and I know what it feels like to cross that bridge and show up in the new earth or the heaven on earth or whatever you might want to call it. And that's what it's about, it to come to a place of exchange that we can bring this about in this world. And I know how inspired you were just by speaking and being heard. It was a beautiful thing. And, you know, we've been playing some paddle since, and you got the whole thing, and we're going to be doing more of that for sure. So what was your takeaway of that? You know, what was your feeling after the first part?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that, you know, perhaps the hill in the myth of Sisyphus, we just spoke about symbols before as well. There's so much that's coming up here, but perhaps the hill is the grind, isn't it? It's the institution that locks you in, as you're saying. It's the corporation, you know, the organisation that locks you into that mindset where, yeah, your time, you know, equates to money, and that's how you sort of have to go about your life. And I think that's very true, you know, certainly in my kind of day role, there's no real time to question existence because that would get in the way of the work ethic. You know, Simone Weil, another amazing philosopher that I love to read, talks about this as affliction. You know, affliction is when, you know, the worker cannot question what it is to be in that environment because to question it would conflict with the work ethic and would, you know, render them unable to contribute productively to the production line kind of thing. And you're right that institutions, corporations, organizations that lock people in to that kind of way of life essentially lock people into the pushing of the boulder. So I think certainly, you know, there's a lot, I guess, to be said of trying to sort of break free from that monotony. And for me, doing that just for the day, you know, coming on the podcast and being free and having that chat, you know, those are moments that you really want to savor because, you know, according to Camus and maybe even Sartre, that's when you're truly free. You know, that's when you carve out freedom for yourself, when you are doing what you love doing in the moment, there's present moment focus, all that kind of mindful sort of activity is truly what we should be doing. But, you know, that's a difficult place to reach, isn't it? You know, we have to grind, we have to make money, we have to create security for ourselves, whatever that means. And so we're locked into cycles of, I think, you know, perhaps what Sartre would call bad faith living, you know, which is we're locked into cycles of doing things that really aren't ours. They belong to somebody else, and we have to perform these different roles. And so wherever we can break free from that monotony, I think we move more towards our true possible selves.
100%. And this, when you say true possible self, it sounds like you may be referring to the higher self. But you know what? What would it look like for you then if you were to drop that boulder and go into that place? What would your life look like?
Oh, great question. I suppose it would look like a wonderfully sporadic set of events that I would just enjoy fully, you know. There would be no theme. There would be no coherency. There would just be, dots of events and wonderful people around and sceneries and sunsets and things that I would enjoy in no particular order. I think it's interesting that order in life is something that is kind of generationally or systematically in some way passed down to us as something to achieve, conscientiousness, those sorts of ideas. And I have this theory that that's really the route to pain. It's the route to suffering. For me, less order, more present moment focus, get caught in conversations, be late for things because you are caught in moments, and live a little bit more free. I think that's what I would enjoy doing.
I'm not surprised because it's not that you say this and you find yourself in some of the hardest structured places in the world, prisons, where they are so structured and so rigid. They are the absolute opposite end of freedom, and there you are within that structure that you find yourself in, because it's a representation of how you see yourself, and that is projected outwardly, and it's your freedom that you want to escape from, yet you put yourselves in this situation. And it's, because for you it's structure and it's this confinement of how you see it, and you want to be able to be free of that. And that is the construct of the mind. It wants to structure, it wants to separate, it wants to dissect. It's something that I've been very used to myself, and I have my own experience of prisons, not being in one, of growing up. So I understand where you're going, and I just want to speak about the boulder one last time from another perspective, which was, everybody's also pushing that boulder, even if you are financially free, because the boulder could also represent your condition.
Right.
The condition that you have since childhood that is limiting in some way, that has you with limiting beliefs, that has you feeling triggered. It's like you don't belong to yourself. The boulder is still your past showing up. And I have that at times where the boulder is a lot less now. It can be a rock in my shoe, but it's still there, that it comes about. And when I don't belong to myself, if I'm stressed in a certain situation, like I was yesterday when my wife didn't bring my son's other passport, which had the visa in, because in Dubai you get a new passport, the visa's still in the old one. So I had to rush back in the car and rush back again. And I kind of went into automatic response of being angry. I wasn't angry at her for getting it. But it was like an automatic state I would go in, because it was a state that I learned from my father growing up, that I kind of needed that energy in order to take the action, to know that I needed that fuel to get home, to get there and back in time. Would I have been able to do it in a calm state? Would I have missed it? And then she reminded me, well, is it worth breaking the equilibrium for the sake of them making that flight? And it's that, that becomes like the little boulder in my kind of way, that I feel like, there is still that condition that, as a human being on this planet, that we all have in common. We're all shifting the past, the condition, or the entities that don't really belong to us, but we have obviously picked up based on our, the depth of our subconscious mind, that is happening behind the scene, and is, regulating our heartbeat and the temperature in our body, and and it filters 200,000 bits of data every single day through our 5 senses, that we're trying to make sense of the world based on our own belief system. So when we start to break that down and we start to really cleanse that, then we become less conditioned to try to pick out things based on an old paradigm or program. Then we can really start to be free and start to see opportunity wherever we show up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. And excuse me.
Too early on.
I have this
Too
thing.
early on.
I need to see like like some sort of I can't remember what do you call those people who use loads of kind of herbs and different things.
I just went to see one yesterday.
Yeah.
I went to the Shanghai Medical Clinic. I just did a video on it.
I need to go somewhere and cleanse.
Well, he put together. It tastes terrifying, but they say bitter on the tongue and it's sweet for the heart. It's like 50 different herbs, Chinese herbs, and I had it for my gut. And it really does it does the job. So I'll tell you the detail. You can go and check him out. And but he does an old school way of Taoism. And it's a 5,000-year-old technique, and there's no machines, and they just put their 3 fingers on your sort of wrist here, and they check it out, and they look at your tongue, and then they identify what is actually going on. So you might think it's the throat, but it's actually your liver, you know?
Could well be.
Okay, fair enough. Go for it.
So, yeah, I think, well, one thing to say is a thank you to you for alerting me, I guess, to this theme that I hadn't quite spotted before, classic of, the carpenter's door always sticks. As a psychologist, we don't look inward often enough. But I think there's something interesting here with this idea that I've inadvertently filled my life with symbols representing, 2 sides of my existence. This gravitation towards prison being an interesting confinement and enclosure, and the kind of search for freedom, as the opposite side of that. So I think you're onto something there. And I suppose maybe my interest in criminality is coming from that position, the extremes. Last week you mentioned archetypes of, mother and father, resulting in this interest in, violence or kind of offending behavior versus kind of love and affection, that kind of thing. So I think you're onto something. So I'll explore that more. Thank you. And
thank you, brother.
And the other thing is... you've kind of delineated the boulder as a mental pattern as well. So it's not just this kind of structural thing that we're battling, but perhaps the boulder is the reliance on prior mental and behavioural patterns that are no longer working for us, and that we need to interrogate a little bit more, dismantle, so that we can liberate ourselves from those patterns.
Gently, with tender love.
yeah. And I think you're right. And this is going to lead us on nicely now, I think, to perhaps looking at some sort of psychological coaching types of strategies that we can use to alleviate people from those burdens of, mental patterns that are no longer serving them. I think last week we were so richly philosophical almost, and I think I inadvertently created an energy where it's like it's all meaningless. Let's not discuss any kind of practical utility. But there is practical utility, and there are kind of things that we can do to bring ourselves towards a more authentic way of being. And I think one of the issues with the way that I might explain my position philosophically is it can start to look like nihilism. Let's do nothing. But that's not my position, actually. It's really about freeing ourselves from inauthentic modes of existence in order to create space where we can move towards our most authentic self. And our most authentic self is that where we get lost in present moments, where we feel, happiness and elation. And
you should be sitting here now.
I know. Right?
I mean, that's amazing to hear. Yeah. Well, 100%. I'm sure when people are watching this from nihilism to, New Earth to what's going on, where we're going, I think we can say, with all absolute conviction that living from our most authentic self without the condition, if that being the boulder up the hill or anything to do with that, is where most people want to be. Yeah. And, we see the state of the world at the moment that, depending where you are, I mean, from where we live and our community, it's just beautiful. We're blessed every day.
Yeah, we're shielded.
It's like it is heaven on earth,
New Earth.
It's a new earth.
Heaven on new earth.
Heaven on new earth.
We're not plugging anything, but heaven on new earth. That's what I heard.
Yeah, well, that's what we're living. And, I we keep an eye out and we have to be mindful to protect what we want to put in ourselves, and the news is, very negative, but it also helps you understand that, people are going through a hard time based on the news and what it is projected out there. But everybody's an individual and they're going through their own situation, even if they're living in heaven on earth, and they may be struggling with that boulder. And those who have maybe nothing may not have that boulder of any condition at all, because they have the loving childhood and a loving existence, and they don't feel that. But they may be, in a little town in Tanzania called Tanga, where I did voluntary service, and they're just happy. And there are people who are just happy. And it doesn't mean that they need all these materialistic things to make them so, So it is all about what we feel within ourselves and, our mental map and what we project out there. But there are those who, in the middle, they have certain things, but they also have the stress and worries. And I noticed that when we're in a place where we're on sides as well, you pick a side. especially in politics or just any viewpoint from the whole COVID thing and vaccinated, unvaccinated. When we start creating this duality, then we start to have a split, and I see that it creates real agony for people, especially with people in their family, and they see that somebody not in agreement with them, and and I can see that when we came together, we may not be in agreement with certain things, but we're playing paddle afterwards. It was sort of, it's all love here. Hope I didn't go on too much of a rant, and maybe you can
no, not at all.
Throw some coal on that fire.
Yeah, I think. I think that once we recognise that we may be running so many patterns that are not working for us, again, we can liberate ourselves from that, and then we can find something that kind of suits us more and that sort of makes us happy by way of, new patterns in our lives, new relationships, this, that, and the other. I'm interested to know about your background in acting and coaching, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of metaphors to come from this as well. And you often talk in terms of your life, in terms of past self, present self, and sometimes you have kind of a future self type of orientation, but it's not often, So I think you're often making sense of past life and current self. And it feels to me like you're making sense of your current existence based on the dissonance between those two. And sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost feels like you're invoking ideas of past self to keep current self in check, in some way.
I'm really keen to see it through your eyes as I, share a little bit about this. It's very cool, I have to say. There's many different tools you sort of learn along the way when you're coaching. And NLP, something that we all do, but you can understand it, and it's the whole point of influencing and things like this. But as I said, my memory is, I could learn it and be a master in it, but it's all gone. It's all gone.
No, I don't think it has. I can hear a lot of the.
Yeah, it sticks, but it's not. The beautiful thing is, I'm not having to think about it and go, oh, I want to do this strategy now and talk like this or anything. It's just free flow. So maybe it's stuck and I've filtered myself, or it's just happened organically, and it's like it's filtered into the subconscious rather than me consciously thinking about it, let's just say. But for sure, look, I've gone through many different stages, and, from the difficult childhood, and like everybody's had their own challenges, of course, and we all have our own story. It depends if you're living in that story and a victim of that, circumstance, or you have now, come to a place where you're in gratitude of it, and you can then move on with your life. And it took me many, many, many years, until just very recently, where I had real kind of closure with the death of my mother, through a process at the Hoffman. And, I've done many different things, family constellation. I've been to Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within. I've breakthrough experience with Dr. John Demartini, and I've just explored a plethora of different self-development events, and ultimately to know thyself. And and when I coach people, it always stems down back to the childhood, And then you have other coaches, people going to the ancestral, before you were born, and your past life and everything else. And I've done I think I told you about it last week. After we met, I was heading off to this sort of meditation, past life regression, hypnotherapy type thing, and it was quite surreal. What do I see? It's a whole thing, and is it real? Is it not? Is my imagination? I don't know. It's like I'm a skeptic still within myself, because it's not like I'm just going and believe everything I see, But, part of me wants to just experience it, and I guess my experience and my feelings are ultimately what is true to me, not what somebody is saying, though I can be gullible. I used to be gullible at times. So, getting into this, when you mentioned before, like I'm discerning from my past. Well, my past was I was very unconscious. I was drinking, smoking weed and doing all sorts at the age of like 14, and just escaping, the usual thing, not love at home, where do you find it outside, escapism, all of that sort of stuff. And, went on for many years. I'm actually writing my book as we speak and formulating this all. so that, I'm really going to put everything out there, warts and all, of all my shames and absolutely everything. It's easier for me to write it than I think to actually say it out loud for now, because I'm still, constructing it, and I don't want to traumatize myself at the same time by just sharing it so openly. But I've gone through times where I would look back at that Alex, and I was so hard on myself. And I would judge myself, and I'd beat myself up into a pulp, and just be hardly anything left. And I don't know if anybody's been out there and been through a terrible toxic relationship, but when you go through a relationship, especially they call it a twin flame, where you meet somebody who's like a part of yourself that basically needs healing. They're an embodiment of it. All your fears, everything just comes up. And it's really to self-reflect and give yourself self-love. And from my early 30s, I went through that experience, and I didn't go to church or have religion as any background at all, but I was going into personal development. And that was when I sort of started to give myself the tools and understand my life and my awareness, and understand that things weren't just happening sporadically. They weren't just randomly happening. I was understanding that I was actually creating the sabotaging events in my life. And I was actually relieved that I was, because then I could do something about it. If it was all just, well, that's just the way life is, and, we're all in the abyss, then I would be screwed. Because I'd be like, well, oh God, I'm just a victim of this. And, and for a time it was like that until it wasn't. And that's when I started becoming a coach, because I was looking everywhere outside of myself, and I realized that no one's really understanding me to understand what was going on. So I had to learn all the tools, and I was able to then bring that to other people to help them, because of the pain I was going through. I could then help them to pull out that program that was limiting their life, and they thought that, they had free will. And we spoke about it last time. Was it really free will? Or was that the condition that you don't even remember picking up at a time when you were 6 years old or whatever age you were, that's just playing like a record in the background? And when somebody shows up and shows you that blind spot, going, oh, that's an old record you're playing, let me just take that. And you're like, whoa, I don't have to play that record anymore, so I don't have to put that on repeat or push that boulder up and down that hill anymore. It's like, oh, the relief. And to see somebody have that relief, and I could be sitting here and, like we've been doing our podcast, or sometimes I'll be in a supermarket and I see somebody and I feel like there's a moment and I have 10 minutes with them, and I'm and I can see this release of energy just come out of that person. And it's weird how I have accumulated this sort of natural ability and the skills to be able to give somebody, you could call it, it's a healing. It's a healing, and I've had people who have had years of therapy, 10 years of therapy, and I see them in just a situation. I'm just happen to be there, and I see the symbolism. Like, I see what I need to see. They're holding their bags, and I saw her showing up for this event, and I said, your bags are representing the baggage you're carrying. Why are you carrying so much bags, like shopping to, a 4-day event when people are not carrying anything? What does that represent? And understanding her, and then making her, I remember it now. And it was this woman called Claire, and she can testify for sure, came to UPW. I was then working on behalf of Tony and Success Resources, and she came along and she's carrying these bags, and basically identified her relationship with her mother and her father, and she hadn't spoken to her mother for like over 10 years or something. And then that moment I said, drop the bags, give your mother a call. And she had a number, and she gave her a call there and then. Wow. Walked off and came back and was like, and then she was like, I've done 10 years of therapy, and here I am, I've just done, what happened? It was just that moment at that time. It just felt like the time was right there and then. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess when somebody kind of sees you and you allow yourself to kind of be seen as well. It's interesting that, the 10 years of therapy can become something that people use as a level of bad faith existence. It's I'm going to therapy, I'm working on it, but really, you're actually working on solidifying the prison that you've created around yourself for protective purposes. And I remember having a moment similar to that. I was struggling. I've got a long history with OCD. I've struggled with OCD most of my life. It started when I was about 11 years old, which is classic. Dissipated when I was about 14. Came back with a vengeance when I was 24. When I was working in the prisons. OCD is characterized by having intrusive thoughts, very worrying thoughts, and then trying to kind of get rid of them some way. And compulsions can play a part of that, switching lights on and off and opening doors and closing doors. But I had kind of a pure form of OCD, which is purely obsessional. So, and this is a common myth. OCD is not about being clean and not about kind of just compulsions, but it's really about the worry, the intrusive thoughts that one has, and then the need to avoid them. So a flashing image of something terrible happening to a loved one results in, I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. Why did I think that? Why did I think that? And, you create a real kind of mental prison for yourself. And I remember, I must have been trying to sort of reach out to people in some way, because I was clearly showing something, just as you described there, with the symbols of bags, I must have been showing something. But I remember this moment. I was working for Age UK at the time. And wonderful friend, colleague, family friend, Gail, worked there. She was my boss at the time. And I'd spoken to her a few times. She'd asked me how I was doing. I was saying I'm struggling a little bit with my mental health, but, I'm okay. I wouldn't say mental health then. I'm struggling a little bit, but, I'm fine, just not sleeping well. And I think I'd mentioned a few times, having worrying thoughts and always in my own head, but not mentioned too much because I was worried about, being judged or kind of, being the mental person in work.
Well, you in your field, it would be kind of frowned upon, right? Because you are the psychologist, and psychologists don't have that. When ironically, those who become psychologists and coaches are because they themselves need that help, right?
Oh yeah, we need to be there just as much as the patients or clients.
Even more so, probably.
Yeah, I think so. But I remember this one day, she could see that I was really down, and it was kind of like a photocopy conversation. She just said, "Christian, you don't look okay. You don't look yourself. Are you okay?" But she said it in such a way that was so meaningful that I just felt like, she kind of saw through me completely. It wasn't like, "Hi, Christian, you okay? You look a bit tired." It was like a kind of deep, like, you don't look yourself. Are you okay? I said, I'm really struggling. And she just said, you're not your thoughts. They don't control you. You're you. You're not your thoughts. And it was just like,
relief.
And what do you mean? And it was her way of accessing my issue that I didn't want to talk about. And it was kind of like, well, she sees what's going on. So then that prompted a big conversation. It was kind of into the office, and I was just let loose with what I was struggling with. And, she told me that she'd struggled with similar things in her life. And it was the beginning of, healing, as you say. It was the beginning of awakening some consciousness to what this was, And I think there are moments like that where, you transcend beyond the rational, and some people just see things, they're really, and I do believe in those powerful moments, by the way. You're looking at me almost as if to say, you're not supposed to believe in this, you're supposed to talk about the abyss.
You're projecting.
And this, but
I know you know this. I know deep down there is that aspect of yourself who had these experiences that you know that it's hard to explain, but is a connection. I'm not sure there's a device yet that can measure it between us, but 100% that, it's intuition, we're all connected. And we have to really understand that there is no separation. So whatever you see outside of yourself, and you're looking at somebody, maybe looking at me, or looking at Christian, and you will probably relate to what we're saying. And as this goes on, maybe things might come up, and, usually when you're vulnerable, people don't judge that vulnerability, But hey, there's always somebody out there, there's always going to be haters or whatever it is, and that's okay, because we are you and you are us. So whatever you judge, it will stick to you. And, there is no sides. There's no looking at, they're wrong and we're right. That's separation in any way, in any regard. And, New Earth is about how is everybody included? Because everybody has a point and they just want to be heard. They want to be seen. Because when you are accepted as you are, and you understand that, Christian, you are, the beautiful human being that's here on earth. You have your soul that's right there in you, and you can say, well, that's a belief and it could be real, whatever or not. It doesn't really matter. And then there's a condition, that boulder, that we all have something in common that we're all working through. And that boulder or that condition wants us to believe that we are separate from everybody else, because then it carries on living like an entity. And when that entity is suddenly shown a light on it, and you and me are looking at that entity together that's within you, or that could be within me, then we can show that love, and then it can transpire or transform itself. It doesn't live in the darkness that we feel like we have to keep enclosed anymore, because we're all battling to keep that. I think the analogy is that cork underwater. You know, it wants to come up,
Sure.
and we all have that, and some are bigger than others, you know. And it was that you was kind of, you know, putting a face on, the mask.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, it's all good, I'm great. And I've been there, I've been there. And when you're going through such a difficult time, and especially when you are infatuated with somebody, or you just you can't stop thinking about it. You wake up in the morning, it's like you're having a shower, you're just like, please, how do I stop this incessant thinking of this person, and the person I'm thinking of, I think that they don't think I'm enough, and I'm worthless, I'm this and that, and then you just and it becomes this, and then you want to get close to this person to show that you're not all of that, but then more you go forward towards them, the more it confirms that you are a piece of shit, you know. So it's like you're caught up in this like madness. It's like a mad circus, and I've been there to a point I just wanted to like, you know, no more. I'm done. Check out. Tag anybody, please. And you do feel like that. And there are times in life that you feel like you just want to tag out and just say, somebody take over, something. And that's the rock bottom. That could be seeing whatever you want to look at, the boulder that's finally run down the hill and you can't push it up anymore. It's just on top of you. You know? And then you just go, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's the awakening, because something comes along and lifts it up. And it is your spirit that kind of lifts you up, and it suddenly goes, okay. And that's where I was. I mean, I went rock bottom. I didn't know where I was going to sleep. You know, I felt so worthless. I was pretty much homeless, you know. And then I had to build myself up, crashing on a couch. And then it was like listening to YouTube videos of like motivational, inspirational stuff, you know, Abraham Hicks and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, to go from that to where I wanted to top myself in 2015, which I share in the book of the reasons why, then the deeper stuff, to then show up at an event, a UPW, but before then reading the books, like seeing some ray of hope, even though I felt like I would be forever never connect with anybody and never have an intimate relationship again. I never really thought I'd be able to. That's the kind of stage I was in my life. And to then come out of that, and then within 18 months of beginning of 2016, when I wanted to, you know, end of 2015, 18 months later on stage talking to people, you know, like what? And then, you know, having a book written, what? It was a small little book, like a pamphlet, but it was still something I wanted to give people for free and sign it at my own cost, just to, because I envisioned it and I connected to that feeling of it and I manifested it. So I was like, okay, so I can do this. I'm in some control. And though I was still on that journey and speaking, I still had a lot of work to do with myself. It was like, you know, you grab something as you're going down the river and you just grab onto something and you kind of pull yourself out, you know, because the current of life can be so strong and it can take you. But is it life taking you, or is it your condition taking you? And it really is the condition, because your condition hooks onto other people's conditions. And then you don't belong to yourself because the world is telling you you're not enough, and you're telling yourself you're not enough. And do you have any free will at all, or are you just looking to hold on to something and other people's ideologies and their beliefs so that you can be a part of something, because you don't know if you're actually part of yourself? And that's how people can manipulate you and control you until you find yourself in your true core value. And that is what I feel like New Earth is representing, that everybody is that. Everybody has that core to then know who you are, to then be able to discern, you know, am I going towards love here, or is this, you know, hate one side to the other side? You know what? It's very challenging to be able to discern. It takes a lot of work to get to a place where you can see it. And it wasn't that long ago that I had a challenge with our business partners for the cafe, and able to discern if I was being manipulated or not emotionally, because I was, you know, had some unresolved stuff to deal with that was still playing out. And I'm like, good God, I'm a coach and I do all this stuff and still this happens. And we all go through it. You know, we're all going through our stuff. And that's the beautiful thing, that we don't judge it. We are also not a victim of it. And we can transcend that experience and keep growing and expanding and enjoy the ride. Anyway.
Interesting. I just wrote down transcendence, and that's where I was kind of going next. I think one of the themes that crops up already so often in when we talk is giving back and reciprocity. So, when we want to transform a negative, harmful experience of the past into a source of wisdom for the future, and we do that by, becoming a professional X, as they call it, or a wounded healer. And, you describe this kind of affection for that role that you have as a wounded healer, and the importance that you drew from producing the pamphlet, giving something back, recognizing in other people what you may have recognized in you once. And it seems that a common theme in humanity generally is that, healing happens through connection with others, but also through, reciprocity, through shared problem solving. We don't kind of heal, or we don't move forward towards a more authentic way of being alone, do we? We do it through discourse and through dialectic with others around us. And so transcendence, is really often connection, isn't it? And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I'm really interested in this kind of social loneliness idea. So we know now in research that social loneliness, which is a construct that we can measure in psychology, is a greater threat to longevity than heart disease, diabetes, things like that. For the statistician out there, there's a few little problems that you have to kind of figure out with that correlation. But social loneliness, a great social harm and social connection, is such an important thing. And in terms of one of the things that we can do to go from, these abstract concepts and philosophical notions like trying to carve out meaning, trying to move towards your authentic self, I want to talk a bit more about what we can actually do to get there. And one thing is definitely service, isn't it? Giving back, putting ourselves in positions where we're helping others, we're molding parts of our lives for service. Altruism's a difficult word, but, selflessness. And it seems like when we do that and when we connect with people, when we allow ourselves that reciprocal kind of discourse with people that can help us and that we can help as well, we really can transcend a lot of the things that we're going to struggle with.
100%. What is suffering? Suffering is we make it about ourselves. When we suffer, it is ourselves. As soon as we do something, and it can be sending somebody a nice message, smiling at somebody. If you think you don't have anything to give, you do. You have your smile. You can ask somebody a question. There's so many things you can do, but it means getting out of your way. And like you mentioned before, you had the OCD, and it really does feel like a dark cloud, so dark that you don't even know if the sun exists anymore. And when you were in that place, you had a connection with somebody who saw you, and it was like a ray of light pierced through that cloud, and it just allowed enough space for you to be able to breathe and share. From after your experience, what did you do to carry on to kind of expand out of that space? What was your coping mechanism and to a point where you felt like, okay, the sun does shine as many days as there are sometimes clouds?
Yeah, well, I know now that what happened was, a little tweak of narrative psychology. I suppose I'm a narrative psychologist in that I'm really interested in the way that we make sense of our existence. We all have an inner monologue. We talk to ourselves about ourselves, don't we? And that inner monologue will determine an awful lot about our temperament, our mood, our relationships. And so all day long, I was just in my own head telling myself that I wasn't these thoughts. Why am I having these thoughts? What's wrong with you? You're crazy. And it's so draining, and you don't have a limitless capacity. So, you become ineffective in work, you become ineffective in your relationships, and it was just a drain. And indeed, I got to that point where I was like, and I went to the doctor and, I said, I'm tempted to tell a joke now, but I went to the doctor and said, I'm struggling. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm in my own head all the time. I'm constantly anxious. And at that time, mental health was still kind of a dirty word, there wasn't much support. And I was kind of just sort of passed aside, really. It was like, well, I'm not happy to give you any drugs. It's like, well, I'm not here to score drugs. I can do that around the corner. But, wow. So nothing was really changing. So when Gail kind of allowed that sort of ray of light to creep in, as you say, it was really a hook for change. We call it a hook for change in narrative work, which I like. It was a catalyst. It was wow, someone sees this. I can't be this kind of weird, lonely, unique individual with this problem. And so it allowed me then to stop going through life with this fear response, like avoiding the situation. Don't read about it. Don't think about it. If you just don't think about it, it doesn't exist. Okay, Christian? And instead, I
don't think about the pink elephant.
Exactly. In fact, I'll tell you I'll tell you what happened. So that allowed me then to start exploring things. I started, Googling, which actually was helpful for once, these kind of intrusive thoughts and learning more. I bought a couple of books on OCD and I was like, wow, that's me. That's what I'm doing. Wow. And so psychological insight was allowing for greater learning, was allowing for slow transcendence. And with that now, I was in the social space. I was telling more people about it. I was growing comfortable communicating about it. And actually, it was starting to become a quirk about existence rather than a burden of being. And I went to a lecture at the time. I was studying at Nottingham Trent University. And I kid you not, usually I wouldn't have gone to lectures because I was so messed up. I was in bed all day. I was miserable. And I walked past this room and it said guest lecturer, OCD, right? So I walk into the room and I'm like, I take a seat at the back. And the woman at the front said, everybody in this room, pick up your pen and I want you to write on your notepad, I sincerely hope. So I wrote, I sincerely hope. And then the name of a loved one. So my mum, Lorraine. I sincerely hope my mum, Lorraine, and then she said, dies in a car crash this evening.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure this is a bit of an upbeat, right? So everybody in the room, pens went flying across the room. Some people wrote it down and then screwed up the paper and threw it on the floor. Some people ripped it up. Some people, I was looking around the room, had written this and then crossed it out. So then this woman said, right, hands up if you managed to write the statement. So, half of the room, put their hand up. Those who didn't write it, how far did you get? Well, I got as far as the bit where you said die and then that's it, Okay, those who did write it, what have you done since? I've ripped it up, I've screwed it up, I've crossed it out. She said, okay, those are all compulsions. And I was like, I see where she's going. This is amazing. And she said, right, anybody has written the whole thing down and not done anything? So a few hands went up. Have you been saying something in your head? Yes. What have you been saying? I don't need to happen, I don't need to happen, I don't need to happen, I don't need to happen. That's an obsession.
Yeah.
And she goes, that right there is OCD.
Beautifully done. Right. That's divine intervention.
It really was. And but again, the kind of pathway was ray of light, acceptance, opening up, willingness to build psychological insight, great desire to change, more so than the desire to stay the same. Opened up an opportunity for the universe to throw this guest lecturer at me, took the opportunity, and that was it. I could say that was, if there was a moment, there's never a moment, I guess, but if there was a moment where it was like, you're cured, I'd have to point to that one. And it was just amazing. And I think the amazing thing is, right, this has normalized everything. This is about threat activation. It's about being worried about, making predictions in the future. I get this thing now. It's okay. And instead of saying to myself, stop thinking about the red elephant, stop thinking about the pink elephant, think about it. And after 2 minutes, it drifts away anyway.
Exactly.
And that was it,
That's beautiful. I'm sure so many people can relate to it when they heard that. Freaked out. Well, if you're watching that and you freaked out, then maybe that is your OCD right now. Be aware of what your self-talk is and just let that pass.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've re-delivered that. And I remember one of the best lectures I ever did was in Liverpool for the University of Liverpool. And it was on, narrative psychology. And I got everybody to do that. I don't do it now because I'm too scared. And I think we live a little bit in, a cancel culture, or whatever we want to say, that, getting in front of a stage and telling everybody, dies in a car crash tonight is a risky thing to do. God forbid somebody's lost, a parent and it triggers them. So I tend not to do it, but it was such a powerful task, But
it's also a shame that, we talk about cancel culture now. And I say shame. Is it shame? Is it just natural being of what's supposed to happen? That you feel limited based on the fear that though a tool that really changed your life, you won't be able to show it to others because you feel that their reaction to it will stop you from being able to practice and do what you do. And it's a shame because that's where the shame is, because it's a limitation, but it's a belief that you're carrying, that you're projecting onto those who would actually benefit from it. And it sounds like something, it worked for me, I've got my experience, and yes, if it does trigger you, great, because that's why we're here. And you can have a pre-warning. This place is to be triggered, and, it's preempting, so giving people a little these are the things that may happen. Are you willing to participate? Because then they're open to it. And those who are not, they can obviously leave the room, and that's okay. So you're putting a warning label on it, because some people are just not ready to be triggered that way and can't hear it. And I know people around me who have been in rooms where, I've done a program and done a lot of work, and then I'd invite a family member, and they would, be in this environment for an hour and be too triggered to stay there, and they would have to leave because they're just not ready to hear what they need to hear, and that's okay. But it's when you take that trigger and you've internalize it to make it mean something. You've allowed that, say, OCD narrative to take over to the point where it's now overfilling, and you want to make a point and stop it from happening to other people. Then who are you really protecting? Because then it's just, you're protecting your compulsion, your trigger, and that's where potentially cancel culture kind of comes in, and it stops the healing for other people because of their own fears, and that fear becomes a group, and those who have the loudest voice are those who are usually in fear together, because they have a big why, which is they are very scared. And we need to have compassion for those in the cancel culture, because they are scared, they are fearful, and they may be angry, and they can be unpredictable. Because they're now, ultimately all pushing this boulder together, and it's not about, it just feels like there just needs to be compassion for everybody and everything out there. And though it can be very hard when you're in a position where you may be faced with a situation and you're triggered, and our videographer's not here, but he said it was all right, I think. He said it was okay basically we had a situation we were working together, and it was something to do with handling the money. So he was getting paid for some work, and we had an agreement, and yada yada, and we have somebody else who takes over that sort of thing, right? And because he couldn't have access to me about that, I just wanted to speak about the creativity stuff. He had this feeling of betrayal and abandonment that came up, and he acted out in a way that because he felt betrayed, then he could allow himself to go off with that emotion and find out stuff about my life, and go to my ex-business partner and find out, why is this guy who's in charge of money around them so often, and sharing my personal stuff to my ex-business partner that we had a disagreement on. So, when you hear these stories, and you're maybe hearing gossip and things like that, and we're in this community, I'm like, first instinct is angry, and I felt betrayed, and all that stuff, victim stuff comes out, and then we need to sort it out. The videos and stuff he transferred, and it was done. So then I wanted to sit with him once that was sort of done, and then I wanted to confront. Right, first it's confront, because I didn't want this bad juju around, and I also wanted to understand him, but I also was seeing that Alex was sitting there as well. So there's Alex, and there's my higher self, right? But when you're emotional and you're triggered, the higher self is just a little whisper. And it's just fully you in your emotional state, which is the cancel culture, ultimately. When you're in that state and you're triggered, then you feel right and righteous, and you want to stay in that pain body, as Eckhart Tolle talks about it in The Power of Now. And so when I'm sitting with him and I'm hearing these stories, and I'm confronting him with it, I could feel the Alex and the anger, and as we're talking it out, and I'm tempted to say, you're barred from this cafe, you're never coming back, But my higher self, I understood I was there not to be that, even though I needed this stuff to kind of come out and vent, and hearing his perspective, him trying to argue his sort of points about something, and I realized that we're missing the whole thing. And the higher self really came in to see a third person perspective of our conversation at the same time. So I had to sort of step out and observe that Alex is emotional right now, and I was explaining to him why I was emotional, and why this incident was taking place, why I suddenly felt betrayed, and because you're going talking to this person and everything else, to get to the point where I was calming down and helped him see, where did this actually stem from? Where did your first point of betrayal come from? And it came from at 6 years old, and moments here, but the biggest one when he was 17, when his basically father left the family, and he felt angry and betrayed. And I said, when you operate from a place of unhealed trauma, I said, have you resolved that? And, he had not. And I said, well, when you feel there's trauma that's unresolved, then you are stuck in time. You're still acting out as that 17-year-old. And I'm sure you spoke to everybody else about how bad he was. And you're getting everybody on your side about how wrong he was and how right you are. And I'm sure that you're reenacting that same situation. And now I'm your father. And you're going around and talking to people. And I get it. I get that's your automatic response, fight or flight mode, and because of a past trauma. But I am not your father. And, this projection onto me is acting out of a 17-year-old mindset rather than who you are now. You're an adult and, we can handle this situation very differently. And I'm sure you didn't feel great, even though you felt right. But how did you really feel about that? And nobody really feels that good. You feel it in that moment because you need that payoff and you need to convince yourself of something. But it's not really something that is a wholesome, lasting feeling because you're still stuck in your trauma and you've just stuck to yourself there again back in that time. And it just becomes this, like your timeline of the trauma and it just repeating itself and you're projecting onto somebody else and it just keeps repeating itself. So once we identified it and I calmed myself down and my higher self stepped in and we were able to converse and understand, he was able to reflect and heal that aspect of himself. Because I said, there's always two sides. There's always a place to be grateful for. When my mum died, I could have said, it's terrible and everything else, but I see the beauty in it as well. And when you see the other side and you see everything as a gift and it really is coming to support you, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you, then you can transcend that energy, that trapped, unresolved, sticky, gunky energy that wants to stick onto everything else and you want to project it onto everything else. Then you don't have to live in that traumatic cycle anymore. And, he had a tear in his eye and he realized, and I said, when you are in a place where you feel abandoned, you also feel needy. So you become a needy energy because you feel like you are abandoned or rejected, and rejection breeds obsession. So again, it was highlighting something to him, even though I was there, one like arguing, angry and everything else, but to come to a place of resolvement and he could have tears and now he's back on the team again. It was like, we're all human and we're all going to do things and it's okay. It's when we get ourselves out of the way and we can connect to there, and we all want the same thing, love, and you hold that space for somebody else, then they can heal. And I just didn't want him to go out there and repeat that with somebody else, for him to hurt and him to hurt somebody else. It was really, I had to get myself out of the way and make it, a loving thing. And we hugged and that was it. There was no more bad blood. It was done. He was acting out of something in the past, as we all are at times. And that's why it's never personal to us when we start to look at it through a different perspective.
Yeah, I think when you get a chance to heal, a broken bond, or when you get a chance to transcend above the temptations for hostility and whatnot, it's a great opportunity. And I think, as early as Freud's ideas of suppression, that negative energy goes somewhere. If you retain that negative energy, that relationship that's fractured, and you don't manage to kind of heal it, you retain that, and if you carry through through life with you a number of those fractured relationships, you quickly build up, a very negative way of thinking.
What the mind suppresses, the body expresses.
There you go.
And then it becomes a psychosomatic illness within the body. And I really truly see that when you handle this, your past, your trauma, and you get over the regrets and the blame and the judgment, the illnesses that are showing up in your body, I'm sure if you identify what illness you have, it's a representation or characteristic or trauma of your past that's just showing up, showing you what you need to resolve. Everything is healable. Depending on how deep it is and where you are in the stage of it, if you deal with the emotional charge around it. And I've seen it in my father, I've seen it in people all around me, when they have something and they just, it's like a lesson. It's not happening to us, it's happening for us. Every illness and disease, as much as it said, people may not agree with that, and that's okay. But when you see it in that place, then you feel that you have some responsibility and you have, the destiny's still in your hands. It's not just, you got that and that's just the way it is. It's, okay, what is it teaching me? What do I need to ask it? What is the wisdom it holds?
Yeah, I guess the key thing though is having discourse around it, isn't it? It's not closing off to it. It's like the when I was talking about OCD, and I was talking about talking about it more once that initial kind of door had been opened, that really does start, a healing journey. Healing journey is a tough one for me to use. I don't know why, but it doesn't quite feel like it captures it. But it starts a journey of insight, And I remember one of the most precious things about that time was a dear friend of mine, Phil, one of my best friends in the whole world. I'd let him in on it, and I'd chat to him about the OCD stuff. And he's one of the funniest guys I know. He's hilarious. And, then we'd just be able to joke about it. He'd call me up and be like, what kind of mental thoughts are you having today? I used to live in this apartment in Nottingham, and it was on the 4th floor. And when you look down, the fencing was around the building, and it was like a spiky fence, almost like slightly prison-esque. It was a beautiful building, but, and I used to have this intrusive thought of jumping and like landing on the spikes, and he'd come round, sometimes, and he'd be like, you're thinking about jumping on those spikes, and we'd kind of bring these intrusive thoughts into what they really were, the space they deserved, which was silliness, and that allowed for then what I now know from acceptance and commitment therapy kind of modalities to be unhooking. We unhook from the negative thought, we defuse. In NLP, there's a lot of similar terminologies, but when we can find a way of realizing that cognitions, ideas, thoughts are just stories that we tell ourselves, and we can tell ourselves different stories if we wish, or we can tell ourselves the same story, but we can extract different meanings from it each time, then we can really free ourselves from a lot of emotional pain, that kind of thought imprisonment. And that was something that I was able to kind of do then. And again, this is sort of a theme. With insight comes the ability to express true elements of our thinking, and elements of our thinking that are no longer working for us, patterns that are no longer useful. With your example of your videographer, there's a repetition, there's a recycling of this hostile thinking pattern. People leave me, people aren't to be trusted, I'm going to be betrayed, I'm going to predict betrayal, and I'm going to get in there first.
Well, exactly, and then we create it. We've created those circumstances because it's a familiar pattern that we recognize, and we want familiarity. We're creatures of comfort, even if it means like a pig swimming in its own shit. We feel that's maybe what we deserve as well, and so we keep creating this, and it comes down to deservingness, and and what you feel like you really. Deservingness, what you feel like you deserve from life, and we'll get what we tolerate, and from our videographer, who's gone through this experience, we've all gone through that experience. We've all had our own story or condition that we projected outwardly, and that's why when you're pushing that boulder, you're living in that condition. Your future is already predictable. So when you do resolve that, and you are a clean slate, and every morning is brand new. That's when you really have a past anew. Your past is new because it's not stuck to you. You're not projecting into your future. And that's where I kind of go before, during, and after. This is my future self and past self, because I'm able to identify, am I operating from the past still, my condition? And there's times where it's very easy, I can tell it, even if I'm completely triggered, that my pain body shows up in that moment, and it's like, it managed to get me again, but not to beat myself up about it. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, and you accept its presence. And that thing for me was the biggest learning about overcoming OCD was, if you struggle and you fight against thoughts, oh my word, will they encage you? They'll always win. You almost have to go with this total acceptance, this radical acceptance kind of approach, which is whatever harmful thought occurs, let it wash over me, let it come in, let it go out, question it, interrogate it, play with it, see what it's like, be present with it. Because when you struggle in acceptance and commitment therapy, we call them struggle strategies, and that's when you wrestle against thinking. And a radically different way of doing things from ACT's perspective is, total acceptance. We don't struggle away from any kind of unwanted thought. There is almost no such thing as unwanted thoughts. There are just thoughts, and they may occur. And once they do, we kind of let them in. We kind of see what useful, see how they can be useful, see what utility we can extract from them. And then we kind of move on. But, for me, I think that's the number one thing when working with clients. Most of the time, what they have fallen into is a number of struggle strategies, and they are finding ways in life to struggle away from painful ideas and thoughts that they have suppressed so much so that they're now being kind of eaten from within. And it's about, right, well, you know what, we can change those patterns. Would you like to?
You know, this is where it comes down. It's so important to the tools that we pick up, and you wanted to mention it from the last one, like give people practical tools and what they can take away. And there's one, I got a lot of resources from Hoffman. I've many different courses I've done, and you know, and even created my own meditation. But there's one called pattern recycling, and it's really cool technique. And you listen to it for about 6 minutes, but I'll kind of briefly describe it. So when you have been struck by something, your condition, and you know, you've affected the people around you, because that pattern, that condition does show up. And as much as we feel right and justified in our pain because of whatever's taken over, the sooner we can bring ourselves back to ourselves and realize that that is not truly who we are, it's not our higher self acting out, it's our condition, our trauma, then we can able to discern, you know, between who you truly are and what your condition is. So once it's happened, you know, take that moment afterwards and just sit and breathe and reflect and go back to that moment where you had that experience and really exaggerate it in your body. Where did you feel it? You know, and you start to go back to it and you feel it there and you're just like, and whatever, you know, characteristic, you know, you exaggerate it, right? Animate it. And then you put your hands where that is, you know, and a lot of the time for me it's in my gut, you know, when I'm taken over by something else. And then they say, you know, put your hand on it and then reach deep inside and pull out that entity, that pattern. And with your eyes closed, look at it and see what it looks like in your hands. You know, what color is it? How does it move? And usually there's some like slimy kind of, you know, just this thing.
Slimy awfulness.
Yeah, and you're just looking at it without judgment and you're just going, okay, it's there, you know, this entity. And, it, you know, it came in, okay. And it says, put your hands together, and you put your hands together and you rub like this really fast, and you keep going, you keep going, and then you're rubbing, and then you pull your hands apart, and this beautiful white light shows up, and there's a message. And what's that message in there for you, or is it just a color? No, what is it? You know, maybe it just says love or healing, and it says, now you've got this. Now put it back onto the spot of where you know you felt that pattern show up before, and you put it on there, and you absorb that energy. And you really permeate that throughout your body, and you straight away start to feel, you know, like, okay, I'm recycling this thing. It's now putting something beautiful in. And then you go back to that moment where that pattern showed up, and you now go into a place of, what if that pattern didn't show up and it's now this beautiful transformed light? How are you showing up now in that situation? And then you relive that situation, but from a higher perspective. And then you reprogram yourself to show up, you know, that memory was actually a beautiful memory, you know, I'm now this, and that's what they call a recycled pattern. And then you take away your message from that. So anytime I am triggered, I usually sit with a 6-minute meditation and go, okay, breathe it out, let's recycle it, and let's, you know, move on. Don't beat myself up, don't feel like, oh no, if it's going to show up again, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. It gives you a practical tool, you know. And so out of all the tools, that's the one I kind of go to the most.
Right, that sounds powerful.
Yeah.
So I was booking a holiday for Desiree's birthday. It's on just tomorrow. It's on Wednesday. So we're going away somewhere nice. We can say, because this isn't going to come out. She doesn't know where we're going, but we're going to Zanzibar. And I booked this really nice place, and you know, I was doing all the research to do it. Now, I'm new to things like Sky. I'll get there. I'm new to things like kind of
you'd be late.
like Sky Wards, miles, and all this, that, and the other. And I'm trying to get more savvy with that, because you can get, you know, nice holidays and stuff if you use these things wisely.
Yeah.
So I built up like 100,000 miles. So I was like, oh, cool. Okay, I can do something with that. Surely. Turns out very little. And I went on, long story less long, I was ultimately roped into another one of these corporate scams where they extracted my miles, you know, because I'd not unchecked the kind of paying cash and miles, and I'd misread the thing, and I'd ended up paying 100,000 miles and like 2,000 dirhams or whatever for a flight that was kind of cheap anyway. So they just robbed my miles off me.
Wow. Okay.
I was so intensely angry, right, Alex? And I get angry in this domain. mobile phone bills when they rip you off, corporations getting around things, overcharging you, all that sort of stuff. And then the inevitable sequence happens. You call up to make a complaint or to try to get it sorted. We can't do that now. Read the terms and conditions. Once you press booking, that's it. You've booked it. Non-refundable, non-exchangeable, not everything. Right. And then you get put through to a manager and you're trying to complain to them, but they don't care, and you're just getting pawned off from the other thing. And then there's a third-party entity, so even if we wanted to refund you, we can't because the booking is handled by the third-party company. And you're caught in that corporate nonsense. It's all deliberate, isn't it, to just sucker you into kind of giving away your wealth, or not wealth, but money. And I was so angry, and I felt this internal anger. I wanted to get it out of me. And so I'm going to check out these things.
I'll send you that meditation.
And it happens to me often. I don't get like that. I could be told some dreadful news. I'm strange like this. I'd be fine with it. Christian, you lost your job. Sorry. Christian, hope not, but some sort of medical crisis. I'd deal with it. I'd find a way to deal with it. Christian, your partner's been cheating on you with your best friend. All right, well, I hope they're happy. But in this space, this kind of corporate unfairness, I get so unbelievably angry about it.
It's a helplessness.
Yeah.
Because it's like being taken advantage of.
Right.
And when you feel you're taken advantage of and you can't do anything about it, it's the principle that you're somehow it's the reminder of the system that you're confined to.
Right.
And that's when the reminder of going, you know what, it's a sign to say, like the Matrix, when you're in that kind of world and the unjustification of it and how it's allowed, and it kind of reminds you that you're in this prison.
Yep.
You know, and then we suddenly go back and we forget that we are part of this sort of corporate prison structure.
Right. And I for some reason, I can't let it go, and Desiree kind of found out a little bit about it, and she was like, just relax, let it go. All the things you don't want to hear in those moments. And I'm like, I can't. I feel so internally angry. I could just blow up here, and I'm still angry about it. But I guess my silly example is just reaffirming that we really do create an awful lot of internal angst from mental difficulties, mental obstacles that we face, and we've got to find a way of getting rid of that. In a lot of the talking therapies that I kind of use, in ACT, one thing that we do often is we work on unhooking from unwanted thoughts. So just an example, I was dealing with somebody who had health anxiety. So they were going to die of whatever illness it was that week, so from HIV through to, neurocognitive conditions, early onset dementia. They diagnosed themselves with something dreadful. It's an awful place to be, health anxiety. And then, it's Googling, trying to Google as a compulsion to make yourself feel better. But of course, in Google, all roads lead to brain tumors, cancer, death in 2 days. So it gets far worse for the individual suffering. And so I worked with this chap, who's called Alex, actually. And so one thing we started to do was, right, okay, what sort of thoughts, do you get when you think that you've got a degenerative disorder or whatever? Well, I get, a real physical sensation. And, I start to question, right, why does that exist? What is it? So I'll Google the symptom, and it's uncanny. That's exactly what it is. So I know what you're saying, Christian. I know it sounds mad, but why do I have the symptom? It must be something. And of course, in all of his life, in all of the different facets of his existence and his relationships, he's going to people and talking to them about this, and they're saying, Alex, you're perfectly healthy. They're giving him reassurance.
God, it sounds like me anyway, to be fair, right. When I went through my certain phase. Go on.
Right. You're healthy, it's fine, don't worry about it. And the reassurance actually starts to form part of a compulsive cycle. So now he's seeking reassurance without knowing, and it's reifying, it's validating the initial fear response to a problem that he's created himself.
Guilty as charged.
Right, okay, well, I've got history with it too. And so actually what we started to do is, okay, what if you have got HIV, or what if you have got a degenerative disorder? What would you do? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, let's plan it. Do you want to write a note to your kids? Or do you want to, how are you going to explain it to your partner? I don't know. Well, let's spend today, because it's not going anywhere. You've been worrying about this for 6 months. It wouldn't speak much to the problem if I could just get rid of it in a second. So let's allow it to exist and push somewhere else. Let's write a note to your family explaining that you've got this degenerative disorder. So writes the note. I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry for not being present. Loads of stuff comes out. Right. Okay. Let's have a look. Some of the things that you wrote. You're sorry for not being present as a father. How does that manifest, and what's that been like? Well, I could have done this better. I could have done that better. Okay. For the next week, carry on Googling symptoms if you want, but I also want you to focus on rectifying some of these things that you wrote down in your letter. We're going to put your attention into spending more time with, your kids, into doing these things that you would be doing if you had 6 months left to live because you got a degenerative disorder, right?
Yeah.
So we started to kind of work on this. And really, what we can do then is start to see the positives in that kind of threat activation mode, right? This level of symptoms is telling me something that is deficit in my life. How do I go about fixing that? And when I fix that, there's no need anymore for the presence of this collection of symptoms.
It's highlighting it because it's not, as you said, it's not identifying what the symptom is, but what's the cause of that symptom. And it sounds like you were touching absolutely on this and finding out, well, potentially the cause, but looking at the symptom and looking at the reason that symptom is showing up, because he was showing a gap in his life and he was fearful that if he did go, then he would be left with that. They would be left with the symptom of his cause.
And ironically, that's what he was creating anyway.
Yeah,
And it's like, well, actually, and again, there's something there about feared self, People often run a past self, a present self, but also a feared self. And feared self is very powerful, arguably the most powerful, because you'll know this from NLP work especially, but where you put your focus is what you get, And so if you're constantly focusing on, I don't want to be this type of individual, I don't want to be sick, I don't want to be an absent father, likelihood is you probably will be.
100%.
Because, you get where your focus goes, you get where your attention goes and what you attend to. And so he was fulfilling this feared self.
It's interesting you say that because you know what? We're all a search engine. We all have that within ourselves. And just as you use Google, and whatever question you're going to type, you're going to find the answer to. That goes with ourselves. If you ask questions that are fear-based questions, you're going to find the answer within yourself, and you're going to attract the answers on the outside too. And, we all have access to the most powerful search engine in the world. And you could say the search engine, is it to the subconscious, or is it search engine to the divine cosmos of intelligence that governs the whole universe that we're in? Mm-hmm. I'd rather put my faith there than the system of the corporate structure in Google. Mm-hmm. Because they are working in the confines of the 3D world. We as humans, when you really connect to your higher self, have a function, search engine, to something far wider, far bigger than ourselves, because we're able to create and manifest into this reality that no other form can. Only we are able to do that. And it depends what kind of world we want to live in. If we want to live in the old earth, which is that kind of corporate structure, that anytime I'm pulled into that for some reason, like have to do something, I really want to make sure you have people who do that, because for me, I don't want to operate in that world. When I'm in that, I feel there's
unclean.
It is a place where you feel that somebody's trying to take something, because everybody is in that world, because you're fear-based. You're separated, and when you're separated, you are trying to take because you feel like you're lacking something.
Yeah, you're scarcity-based as well.
Yeah,
right?
and 100%. And when you're in that place, there's no wonder everybody's, and no one to blame. You're part of a system there that is cultivating that disease.
We're competing for limited resources.
Yes, because it's a scarcity mindset, and there's only limitation when there is actually enough for everybody. And if we all stepped into the new earth and actually saw that, we could actually display that so much more easily than we're being taught to believe. And we know that for a fact. I mean, where a lot of this money goes towards separation. We're looking at war. We're looking at, military equipment. I mean, that money was spent on actually, this is how I looked at it. We have this sort of idea that capitalism and profit and everything else is above and all most important. And we look at America and go, this is the best system that you could ever operate from. People really believe that, and okay, it is at that time. But, what's really the most beautiful operating system is nature. That is in synchronicity with one another. And when you're out of sync, then it's just you're going to find greed. You're going to find people who have nothing and people have everything. There's such a polarity, and because it's an unhealthy view, an unhealthy society, and you're going to have poverty, and you can feel that, and it's a kind of control, and it's a kind of take, and people are creating military equipment and want to take over because there's finite resources, rather than this harmonious sharing of a planet, knowing that if we use our might and stop looking at capitalism and profit, that we start to actually come from a conscious perspective. And we had leaders who were more about how do we raise consciousness on the planet, and we all came together, the world would be very different. We wouldn't have the need for war and using all the resources of nature and on the planet and into things like this. We would have it in such a way that everybody could stop pushing that boulder up the hill, and we could actually collectively all be in a creative state that we could be on the top of that hill and just look out there at the cosmos together, and actually enjoy the fact that we shouldn't have to pay to live on an earth that is free for everybody. I mean, who created this aspect that when you're born, you need to now survive by paying to be here? Like who owns that? And it's that illusion of this sort of 3D structure that I know that is starting to break apart, and people are waking up to this idea that it's now time to say, hey, I don't want to be part of that anymore. And the ickiness, even in a phone call, when you just for a moment and feel like somebody's taking something and taking advantage, and I'm not here to stand by and just watch people be taken advantage of, especially the helpless. I feel like that's my thing to do here on this earth, is to shine a light to it and show that people are not helpless, and we do have a power together, that when we step together we can create our own world, the new earth. And it can be away from the old systems and the old paradigm, and we have that freedom, and we will have that choice. But it really means a letting go of the old earth, the old structure, the old perimeters, the old condition. And it means looking within and having that space to really to come from love,
Yeah, so much there, and it almost, points to kind of a whole, different sort of domain, or maybe a whole series on sort of capitalism versus kind of, I'm not quite socialism, but I guess living harmoniously and then invoking ideas of nature and this, that, and the other. I'm reminded of a book from Freud, one of my favorite texts from Freud, Civilization and Its Discontents, where he discusses, all of his kind of psyche, individualist notions, but in the space of wider society. And he discusses this disconnect between the structure of society, which is pretty much about competition for limited resources and therefore about conflict, and, the individual's desire for connection and love. And that kind of dissonance being really, the big conflict in society, and what we're all kind of discontented about. So it's interesting to hear you talk about, the kind of philosophy underpinning New Earth, which is about imagining this new environment in which, we try to erode these notions of, innate competitiveness and conflict, and we try to come together and find ways of doing so. And I think that's just so important, isn't it? When we can come together, create reciprocally beneficial, mutually, loving types of relationships, we really do open our world in a positive way.
Well, it helps to discern if we have a new earth and you see the old. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it, but we're always upgrading, we're growing. What is not been working, which we're happy to leave behind, and what we'd love to see the new earth, entail, and what does it, embody? When I met my wife, the way she saw the world, I really wanted to see through her eyes, because how she saw things was very different to how I saw things. She's very in an expansive state. She's never in a victim mindset, very rarely. She's always growing, always expanding, and sees things at such a high perspective. She's a goddess and priestess in her own right. And I had to deal with my own worthlessness of being next to her.
And then there's you.
And then there was me. It's like a frog. And, sometimes I felt like that. I didn't feel worthy. And maybe I project onto her things to make her look less, because I needed to somehow make myself more, because I felt worthless at times, and it was my work I had to do. This is deep work I had to do with being in her life, and thankfully, did the hardest work I've ever had to do, and I'll share that in the book. And then we've been through. I'm looking at her like she's there, because she would usually sit there, but we've gone through stuff that is abnormal. in the last 3 years when we've come together are just the most stressful situations you could ever envision. And even though we're going through some of the most stressful things, and I'm telling you, it could be a TV series and a movie, all right? This is like the madness that we've gone through. And yet to see how she still looks at the world, you know, this is what I wanted to create. I said to her, I want to create the world and how you see it, you know, because the new earth, I believe, even though we may be going through this stuff, the darkness, you know, but the fact that we can still see the light, and the fact that, you know, there was so much darkness, and any seed that starts is in the darkness, it's in the ground, right? And then it slowly comes up and breaks through, and suddenly you can see the light, and, you know, there we have, you know, trees and everything. And that's what we're going through in it. And then we're breaking through finally, you know, through that dark nights of the soul. And, you know, and we all are going through that transition, you know, we're all going through that. And it just speaks volumes of how she has seen the world and how I'm showing up as a better man for that. Even if I was staying in my condition at times, to be able to be willing to drop that because I want to step into the new earth. And that's when I go for my past self, because there were moments where I knew I had to speak certain truths. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to step in or stay in the new earth. Because I may have an emblem and we may, you know, be birthing this with us. It didn't mean that I automatically stayed in there. And I had to make a choice to go, I have to work on myself every single day to either stay in there. I may have got there, but the hardest thing is to stay there and to carry on growing and carry on expanding and carry on letting go.
I like that. I like this idea of the new earth being like a membership, you know, and there are almost...
It's open to everybody.
You know, I don't mean this in the truest sense, but, you know, there are almost kind of standards that you can hold yourself to that kind of allow you to kind of retain your membership, you know, in a positive way. You know, I like that idea. And I suppose the only the real rules are that, you know, we're open to experience. We're conscious. We're aware. We're looking to build insight. We're looking to create connection. We don't use struggle strategies in the new earth. You know, we don't struggle away from pain. We don't create barriers. We are moving towards authenticity wherever we can.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, the fact that you're here and we're doing part 2, and there's, you know, there must be a reason that, you know, if I put my attention on it for a moment, that, you know, you come from a world that is the 3D world. You know, you've really gone through the institutes, literally from prisons, and how you've come up to, you know, and we're mirroring each other. We're a manifestation of each other. You're probably the aspect of myself that if I had chosen to go through the educational route and find it, that's where I would be. And there's neither good or bad or wrong or right. It's just different. And how you formulate and talk is in a way that I wish I could, because of information, how you retain that information, how you're able to regurgitate it out, and in such a way, it's like you sound like a very intelligent person. And maybe I didn't feel ready I could talk out there, because I'd watch maybe the other people out there, Russell Brand and all these different people who can retain information. I just have to understand that I'm built differently, and I explain things in my own way, which is what I want.
You do so very well, by the way.
Thank you very much.
You're also a very intelligent person, and I don't think that there's... you almost come across almost there like there's a deficit in your sort of working memory in the way that you invoke things. But I think your brilliance and your expression of metaphors is, you know, a particularly strong point. You're really able to kind of invoke mythology and metaphors to articulate points, and that's a great skill. Thank
you. It's like the other Alex looking for a reassurance.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's
I'm caught in the hamster wheel.
You know, but that was my deficit growing up. You know, I had hearing issues. And I had to go to a special class because I missed out the beginning of learning, and I had my older brother who was pretty hard on me and said I was stupid or I was special, and you know, and it really kind of stuck. And as well as being sensitive as well, I mean, you're kind of screwed, aren't you, really?
Sure.
And
I'll tell you what, though, there's nothing like the word special to stigmatize and re-stigmatize a child. You know what I mean? Special class and like.
Oh, why would they say that? I got an award for being special or something like that. My brother would completely annihilate me. I'm like,
some of the mistakes we've made over history, it's got to be up there. You know, calling children special. I would love to be in that board. I would love to go back and be a fly on the wall in that boardroom. You know, that board meeting. You know, the PTA meeting or whatever it is. Right, we've got an issue. You know, with some kids, you know, performing anomalously below par. What should we call the class? I've got it. Let's call it the special class. Great idea, Julie. Thank you so much. It's gonna be the special class.
Julie, this was and I was part of that, and I had the membership for a while.
Yeah.
And and it made me feel so. I mean, I felt less. I felt stupid. That's why I didn't go to college. I didn't go your route because I felt, I just innately didn't feel like I was clever enough, possibly. And also, at the same time, that was a saving grace. That's the beautiful thing about being special, that I didn't go that route, and I didn't really deal with the whole 3D structure. I just, I drifted away. I was here, and I became a creator, and I stepped into acting many years later. And, and that's how I really, connected. I mean, exams and things like that made me nervous. I could not do it. I would, before my GCSEs, I was, I think I vomited a few times. I was not prepared at all. I just didn't know if I was already sabotaging myself, So thankfully, if I hadn't, I'd be stepping into this world and maybe I just wouldn't be where I am today. And it goes for everybody, right? So whatever that was or that limitation, it always turns out to be actually a blessing from above, So thank you, Julie, for creating that, because you can only get there once you've done the work to be grateful for it. Otherwise, it's Julie, But it's like, Julie, thank you. And it is that shift of perspective, but you have to do the inner work to change that, lens for you to be able to appreciate it.
Yeah, indeed. What? That might be a good juncture to.
You're going to have to head off
this one, but there's so much to discuss. Again, I'm just kind of thinking of, again, my entrance into institutions like universities and whatnot. It was also, very kind of. I guess lucky is not the right word, because it suggests that those institutions are something to sort of behold and belong to, and I kind of disavow that idea. But it was certainly not intentional, and actually I have a history of kind of being in the special class in a way as well. Not because of a kind of an identified learning difficulty as such, but because I was just kind of pretty slow. I was called slow at school. I was behind. And again, I was just laughing in my head about the language that we utilized, then, and that we might still utilize, slow, behind, go to catch-up class, being held back a year, thanks, all of those. And then, of course, all the expressions of those labels that we probably invoke later on in life. Certainly they're going to leak in, aren't they? But there's an awful lot to talk about there, I think.
I think there's a lot to uncap. And you know what, going back to our people watching, would love to hear what questions, whatever came up for you guys, whatever it is, that we can maybe do a segment just answering questions. Look, we're going to jump back on, I'm sure, when you get back from Zanzibar. When do you get back?
Monday.
So
only a few days.
We'll do something next week.
Yeah.
We'll jump on this and discuss some stuff. And
brilliant.
Who knows, maybe we'll bring another guest on. We're just going with the flow.
Let's bring Julian.
Yeah?
Yeah, let's bring Julian, get her ideas on the special class. Why? Why did you go with that, Julie? Tell us about it.
Julie. Let's bring on Julie, shall we?
Yeah.
A good idea, mate. Well, look, it's an absolute pleasure to bring you on and to have this awesome conversation. I hope anybody else out there. Brent, you have a good time?
Yeah, so good.
Beautiful. So is there anything you want to say to anybody who may have been watching this?
I guess it would be really nice.
Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. That kind of thing.
Yeah, all of that. I guess it would be really nice to know if there are topics that you kind of enjoyed listening about that we could expand on a little bit more. I think, one of the things I'd like to do is to look at our different strategies a little bit more for coaching, therapy, and kind of utilize some of those different tools, I guess, that we started to allude to, and maybe we could do a session where we actually do a little bit of role play, where we use some of these different tools that we've both explored from NLP and from psychotherapy and whatnot, and to overcome strategies to overcome obstacles. But yeah, let us know what you kind of think you would find interesting and what you think that we can talk about.
Beautiful. All right, that sounds really interesting. We'll give that a roll. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you watching this. Please leave your comments, likes, loves, any questions, everything. And as what Christian said, anything you want us to explore next time. Much love. Take care.